Welcome back, everyone, to the English Hustle Podcast. Here, we explore strategies for success, learning, and personal growth. I'm Alex, and as always, I'm here with Maria.
Hey everyone, today's episode is all about taking risks for success. We're diving into why stepping out of your comfort zone and taking those big or small risks is often the key to reaching our biggest goals and dreams.
Exactly, Maria. And as always, we're keeping it real. A relaxed, honest conversation between friends. We'll talk about taking calculated risks, learning from failures, and the courage it takes to keep moving forward. So whether you're looking to make a career change, start a new project, or simply get more comfortable with uncertainty, this episode is for you.
So, Alex, let's start by talking about what risk-taking really means in the context of success. When you hear the phrase taking risks, what comes to mind for you?
Great question, Maria. When I think of risk-taking, I think of making a conscious decision to step out of what feels safe or familiar. It's like choosing to leave the comfort zone behind and venturing into new territory. Taking risks, for me, isn't just about doing something dangerous. It's about being willing to try something even when there's no guarantee of success. It's facing the unknown because deep down, you believe there's something valuable on the other side.
I like that. So, it's not necessarily about being reckless, but about stretching beyond the familiar. And honestly, we see this in the stories of so many successful people. It's hard to find a story of someone achieving something significant without a point where they had to take a leap, sometimes without knowing where they'd land. Think of entrepreneurs who put their life savings into a business idea, or people who change careers midlife, risking stability for the chance to follow their passion.
Yes! And it reminds me of a quote from Mark Zuckerberg. He once said, "The biggest risk is not taking any risk. In a world that's changing really quickly, the only strategy that is guaranteed to fail is not taking risks." I think that's a powerful reminder that sometimes staying in our comfort zones and not taking risks can be just as risky.
That's such a great point, Alex. It makes me think about how we often view risks as something to avoid. But like you said, avoiding risks altogether can actually mean missing out on growth and opportunity. However, there's definitely a difference between taking calculated risks and just being reckless, right?
Exactly. And that's an important distinction. Calculated risk is all about thinking things through and weighing both the positives and negatives. It's about asking questions like, what's the best case scenario here, and what could go wrong? Recklessness, on the other hand, is rushing into things without thinking them through. It's when we make decisions based on impulse rather than strategy.
Right. And I think the fear of risk often comes from a fear of failure. So many people avoid taking risks because they don't want to fail. But in reality, taking risks and even experiencing failure can be incredibly valuable. Look at people like Thomas Edison. He failed countless times before inventing the light bulb, but each failure taught him something.
Yes, Edison is a perfect example. Each time he failed, he learned a new way not to make a light bulb. That's the key. Failure, when seen as a learning experience, is really just a step closer to success. I think a big part of calculated risk is accepting that we might fail, but knowing that even if we do, we'll gain something valuable from it.
And it's not just inventors, either. Think about athletes who take risks in their training and push themselves beyond their limits. They risk injury, exhaustion, even public criticism if they don't perform well. But without taking those risks, they'd never discover their true potential. And that's a mindset shift, I think, seeing failure or setbacks as something that can actually help us in the long run.
Absolutely. In fact, the concept of failing forward comes up a lot in personal development. It's the idea that each failure propels us closer to success. But it's not only about pushing hard, it's also about pushing smart. Calculated risks are based on preparation, information, and a certain level of self-belief. You're taking a chance, but you're doing it with purpose and strategy.
Yes, and that's so important. So maybe for someone who wants to take more calculated risks, it's about starting small. You don't have to make huge life-changing moves right away. You could start with small decisions like speaking up in a meeting, taking on a new project, or learning a skill you've always wanted to try.
Exactly. Starting small allows you to build confidence and learn along the way. Small risks can teach you so much about yourself, your resilience, your ability to handle pressure, and your capacity to adapt. And those small wins often build the courage needed to take bigger risks later.
And it's also about building resilience, isn't it? The more risks you take, the more you learn to handle uncertainty. Over time, it becomes easier to face that initial fear because you've built the strength to deal with whatever comes.
Totally. And resilience is such a powerful skill. It's what helps us keep going when things get tough, and it's built over time by facing challenges. I think that's why calculated risks are so valuable. They help us grow in ways that staying safe simply can't.
This reminds me of something I once heard. Success isn't about avoiding risks, it's about managing them wisely. And honestly, I think that sums up what we're talking about. When we understand that risk is a necessary part of success, it becomes easier to embrace it.
Exactly. And it's about taking risks that align with our goals. Not every risk is worth it. Sometimes saying no to certain risks is just as important as saying yes to others. It's all about focusing on the risks that move us closer to where we want to go.
I couldn't agree more, Alex. So, for anyone listening, I hope this conversation helps shift your perspective. Taking risks doesn't have to mean jumping in blindly, it can mean stepping forward with a plan, a bit of courage, and an understanding that every step forward, no matter the outcome, brings growth.
To start off, let me share one of my favorite quotes about risk-taking. Jim Rohn, a motivational speaker, once said, "If you're not willing to risk the usual, you'll have to settle for the ordinary." I think that really captures why risk-taking is so essential. If we don't take risks, we may never discover what we're truly capable of.
That's such a powerful quote, Alex, and it's so true. I think one of the biggest reasons risk-taking is essential is because it opens up opportunities for growth. When we take risks, we're pushing ourselves beyond our limits, and that's where real learning and growth happen. If we only do what feels safe or what we already know, we'll likely stay right where we are.
Exactly, Maria. And it's interesting because when we look at people who have achieved something extraordinary, whether they're entrepreneurs, artists, or athletes, they've all had to take major risks at some point. For example, think of Elon Musk. He risked almost all of his wealth on Tesla and SpaceX, two companies that were struggling at the time. If those ventures had failed, he could have lost everything. but he believed in his vision, and that risk eventually led to groundbreaking success.
Yes, Elon Musk's story is a perfect example. And it's not just about financial risk. Think about athletes who risk their physical well-being. Take someone like Michael Jordan. When he chose to pursue basketball, he took a huge risk with his time, his energy, and his reputation. He was cut from his high school basketball team early on, but he kept pushing himself and taking risks to get better. In the end, he became one of the greatest players of all time.
Absolutely. And then you have artists like J.K. Rowling, who faced countless rejections before publishing Harry Potter. She was a single mother on welfare, and instead of playing it safe and taking a more stable job, she kept pursuing her dream despite all the uncertainty. That was a huge personal risk. And look at how it paid off. Not only did she succeed, but she also inspired millions of people.
It's so true. These examples show that risk-taking is often about believing in yourself and your vision, even when there's no immediate evidence that things will work out. Risk can feel scary because it usually means stepping into the unknown, but the payoff can be life-changing. And even when things don't work out perfectly, there's almost always something valuable to be gained from the experience.
Yes, and sometimes the lessons we learn from taking risks can be more valuable than the outcome itself. Every time we take a risk, whether we succeed or fail, we're developing resilience, problem-solving skills, and confidence. And those are things we can carry forward, regardless of the specific result of that risk.
I completely agree. In fact, I think that taking risks helps us build self-trust. When we take a risk and navigate through it, we prove to ourselves that we can handle challenges and adapt to new situations. That self-trust is incredibly empowering. It makes us more willing to take the next risk because we know we can handle it.
That's such a great point, Maria. And it's interesting to consider how, in many cases, the biggest regrets people have are not from the risks they took, but from the ones they didn't take. Research even shows that people tend to regret inaction more than action in the long term. Taking risks, then, isn't just about success. It's about living fully and not wondering what if down the road.
Yes, exactly. And that's why it's essential to keep pushing ourselves. It's easy to get comfortable and stay where it feels safe, but that comfort zone can also limit us. When we take risks, we expose ourselves to new experiences and opportunities that we wouldn't have encountered otherwise. Sometimes, it's the unexpected path that leads to the greatest rewards.
That reminds me of the story of Oprah Winfrey. She took a huge risk early in her career by choosing to pursue a career in media, even when it wasn't considered a secure path, especially as a woman of color at the time. But that risk led to her becoming one of the most influential and successful people in the world. It's inspiring to think about how many lives she's impacted simply because she was willing to take that risk.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the most inspiring parts about taking risks. It's not just about achieving success for yourself, it's also about the potential to make a difference in the world. Many of the risks people take aren't just about personal gain. They're often driven by a desire to contribute something meaningful, to innovate, or to change the status quo.
Absolutely. And sometimes, the risks we take encourage others to step out of their own comfort zones as well. When people see someone they admire taking risks, it can inspire them to go after their own dreams, even if it means facing challenges along the way.
That's such a good point. It's like a ripple effect. By taking risks and sharing our stories, we can motivate others to overcome their fears and pursue their goals. And even if things don't go exactly as planned, we still become role models for resilience and courage.
Yes. So, to anyone listening right now who's thinking about taking a risk, whether it's starting a new career, learning a new skill, or pursuing a passion project, remember that risk is a powerful catalyst for growth and success. It's not about recklessness. It's about stepping forward with intention, even when the outcome isn't guaranteed.
Exactly. Success is rarely a straight path, and there will always be risks involved. But those risks are what make the journey worthwhile. They're what lead to transformation and personal evolution. So if there's something you've been thinking about doing, maybe it's time to go for it, even if it feels a little scary. All right, let's dive into some practical tips for taking calculated risks. So the first tip I'd suggest is to start small. If you're not used to stepping out of your comfort zone, you don't have to go all in immediately. Instead, you can start with smaller, manageable risks. Maybe it's speaking up in a meeting or volunteering for a new project. These small steps can help you build confidence for bigger risks down the road.
I love that approach, Maria. Starting small helps you get comfortable with uncertainty, one step at a time. Another great tip is to weigh the pros and cons. Before taking a risk, it's important to look at what you stand to gain versus what you might lose. Ask yourself, what's the best case scenario here? What's the worst? This way, you're not just diving in blindly, you're making an informed decision.
Yes, absolutely. And along with that, preparing as much as possible can make a huge difference. If you're considering a new career path, for example, maybe take a course or talk to people in that field. Preparation can help reduce uncertainty and make the risk feel a little less daunting.
That's a great point, Maria. Preparation is key, and so is gathering information. Knowledge is power, especially when taking risks. The more you know, the more confident you'll feel. Researching, reading, and even connecting with people who've taken similar risks can give you valuable insights.
Absolutely, Alex. Learning from others who've walked a similar path can be incredibly helpful. It's like borrowing wisdom from their experiences. You can see what worked, what didn't, and maybe even get advice on avoiding common pitfalls. And that actually brings me to another tip. Have a backup plan. Sometimes, no matter how much we prepare, things can go differently than we hoped. Having a plan B in place can provide a safety net and make you feel more secure about taking that initial leap.
Yes, having a backup plan can help manage some of the fear that comes with risk-taking. Speaking of fear, one of the biggest challenges in taking risks is managing that fear. It's natural to feel scared, but we don't want fear to hold us back. Sometimes it's about facing the what-ifs head-on. For instance, you might ask yourself, what's the worst that could happen? Once you realize that you can handle even the worst-case scenario, the fear often feels a lot more manageable.
That's so true, Alex, and I think sometimes we imagine the what ifs to be bigger than they actually are. When we actually face those fears and look at them realistically, we can see that they're not as overwhelming as they seem. Another strategy for managing fear is to remind yourself of the potential positives. Instead of focusing only on the risks, focus on the possibilities. What if things go right? What if this decision leads to something amazing?
I love that reframe, Maria. It's a great way to stay positive and focused on the potential upside. And of course, we also need to be prepared for the possibility of failure. One thing that helps is learning to deal with failure by seeing it as feedback rather than a final outcome. If a risk doesn't work out, it doesn't mean you failed. It just means you have new information. You can use what you've learned to adjust and make better decisions in the future.
Exactly. Every experience, whether it's a win or a setback, can teach us something valuable. If we look at it that way, then failure isn't really a failure at all. It's part of the process. And that's why calculated risks are so powerful. When we take risks thoughtfully and intentionally, even the failures become stepping stones.
Yes, and I think that's an important mindset shift. Taking risks is about growth, not perfection. Each risk taken with intention is an investment in ourselves, in our resilience, and in our future. So, to sum up, start small, weigh the pros and cons, prepare, learn from others, have a backup plan, manage your fears, and see every outcome, positive or negative, as a learning experience.
Perfectly said, Alex. Taking risks doesn't have to be overwhelming if we approach it step by step. So, to our listeners, if there's a risk you've been considering, maybe it's time to give it a try. Remember, success often requires us to step into the unknown, and each step, no matter the outcome, brings us closer to growth. Let's talk about some of the common misconceptions people have about taking risks. A big one I hear often is that taking risks is reckless or something only daredevils do. People assume that if you're taking risks, you must be throwing caution to the wind or acting impulsively without thinking things through.
Yes, that's a big one, and it couldn't be further from the truth. In reality, taking risks can be a very smart, calculated decision. Many people who take risks actually spend a lot of time planning and preparing. They weigh the pros and cons, evaluate different scenarios, and think about the potential outcomes. So instead of being reckless, they're often making decisions that fit into a bigger plan for their life or career.
Exactly, Alex. Another common myth is that risk takers are always confident. People might assume that those who take risks are fearless and don't have doubts. But in reality, many people who take risks feel nervous or uncertain. They're just willing to take a chance despite those feelings. They're able to manage their fear and move forward, even if they're not 100% sure things will work out.
That's so true, Maria. Risk takers aren't necessarily more confident. They're just better at handling the uncertainty. And here's another misconception, that only people with nothing to lose take risks. You often hear people say that it's easy for young people, or people without many responsibilities, to take risks. But the truth is, people from all walks of life, parents, professionals, even retirees, take risks all the time. It's less about having nothing to lose and more about having a strong enough reason to try.
Yes, I love that. Sometimes, it's actually the people with a lot on the line who take the most calculated risks because they're working towards something meaningful. They might feel the fear even more, but they're committed to their goals. So, to anyone listening who might think that taking risks is only for a certain type of person, I'd encourage you to rethink that. It's not about being fearless or having nothing to lose. It's about being willing to grow and adapt.
Well said, Maria. Taking risks is really about believing that the potential reward is worth stepping out of your comfort zone, no matter who you are or what stage of life you're in. It's not about being a daredevil. It's about being open to new possibilities. All right, as we wrap up, let's go over the main points we discussed today. We talked about how taking risks is essential for growth and success, but it doesn't mean acting recklessly. Thoughtful, calculated risks are what help us move forward, challenge ourselves, and uncover new opportunities.
Exactly, Alex. And it's important to remember that every successful person has faced risks along the way, whether they're entrepreneurs, artists, or athletes. Risk-taking doesn't have to be about huge, life-altering decisions either. Even small, everyday risks, like speaking up, trying a new skill, or applying for a new role, can add up over time and bring you closer to your goals. And before we close, we'd love to hear from you. Share your own risk-taking stories or let us know about something you're considering taking a risk on.
And if you enjoyed today's conversation, make sure to follow the English Hustle podcast for more motivational and growth-oriented discussions. We're here every week with new episodes to help you on your journey to success.